The phone had been screaming from beneath the velvet chair for almost a minute before Ramon Bellacosta noticed it. Sylvie never forgot anything. Not gloves. Not invoices. Not names. Not the tiny weather changes in a room when somebody was about to lie. Yet her phone lay face up on the Persian rug in Ramon's library, vibrating so hard it inched against the chair leg like it was trying to escape. Ramon bent, picked it up, and saw a video thumbnail bloom across the lock screen. In the frame sat his younger brother Luca, cross-legged on the conservatory floor with a bowl of blue sea glass in his lap. Luca had not formed a full sentence in 19 years. Not since the fire at Pier 9 took 11 people, including Ramon's sister Clara, and left Luca's speech shattered into fragments. In the video, Luca looked directly at whoever held the camera and said, "Calm as rain. Tell Ramon Mr. Sharp locked Clara in." Ramon stopped, breathing, because Owen Sharp had helped raise him, because Clara had been dead for 19 years, because Luca was not supposed to remember anything clearly, and because the phone in Ramon's hand belonged to the woman he was supposed to marry in 12 days. He replayed the preview. Luca's mouth moved again. The sound clipped by the lock screen. Mr. Sharp locked Clara in the library. Usually the one room in the house that obeyed Ramon seemed to tilt. Dawnlight pressed weakly against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, the espresso machine hissed in the kitchen where Bernice would be setting out breakfast. A car passed outside. The city kept moving. Ramon's thumb hovered over the screen. He had lived by one rule longer than he had lived by any law. Never touch what you are not prepared to know. He unlocked the phone anyway. Sylvie's passcode was 6 digits. He knew it because she had once asked him to answer a call while she was elbow deep in glue and lacquer, and then never changed it. Ramon had taken that as trust. Standing there in his robe, barefoot on old wool, he understood it might have been something else entirely. Carelessness, strategy, or the reckless hope that a man like him would choose not to look. The video opened in full. Sylvie's voice came first. Soft and patient. "Again, Luca. Only if you want." Luca looked thinner than Ramon had realized. His hair had grown too long above the ears. He rubbed a shard of cobalt glass between his fingers the way he did when his mind was working around fear. "Blue means choir," Sylvie said off camera. "Blue means Sunday. Who closed the yellow door?" Luca blinked. Then, with agonizing effort, he touched his own throat and whispered, "Sharp. Who was with Clara?" "Me. Who else?" A pause. Ramon heard a clock ticking in the conservatory, heard the little catches in Luca's breath. "Mother," Luca said. Ramon's chest turned to stone. Sylvie did not react on camera except for one quiet inhale. "What did she do?" She said no. Another pause. "Did Mr. Sharp listen?" Luca's eyes filled so quickly, it looked like a trick of the light. "No." The video ended. Ramon didn't realize his hand was shaking until the phone tapped against his ring. There were 47 more clips in the folder. He watched 3 in a row. In one, Luca lined pieces of amber glass into 3 columns and tapped the center column twice. Sylvie asked what it meant. He said, "Side door. Side door. Side door." In another, he stood at the piano in the east sitting room and played the same 6 notes over and over until Sylvie asked, "Was Clara singing?" He nodded and pressed his palms flat over his ears like a child under thunder. In the third, Sylvie never showed Luca's face. Only his hands. They sorted blue, green, red, red across black felt. "These are windows," she murmured. "Yes, windows. Not boats. Not bills, windows." Luca, almost inaudibly, said, "Father hid it in light." Ramon stared at the words without blinking. Father hid it in light. The phone suddenly felt radioactive. At 7:08, the front door opened downstairs. He heard Sylvie's voice drift into the hall, apologizing to Bernice for having forgotten her phone and coat in yesterday's storm of wedding invitations, caterers and last-minute calls from half the eastern seaboard. Pretending not to care who sat at Ramon Bellacosta's head, Table. Ramon left the library before he had decided what his face should do. He met her in the entrance hall. Sylvie Mercer stood in a charcoal wool coat with rain still caught in her dark hair, a portfolio tube under one arm, and that unhurried expression she wore when other people were in a rush to impress her. She was 36, fine-boned and steady, with a mouth made for withholding the first thing that came to mind until she had decided whether truth would do any good. Ramon had fallen in love with her in stages and hated every one of them. First her hands, then her refusal to be charmed by wealth, then the fact that Luca, who barely tolerated touch from anyone, let her sit beside him in silence. Morning, she said. Ramon held up the phone. Everything in her face stopped. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. You saw something, she said. Ramon descended one step. My brother spoke. Bernice emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray and looked between them once before retreating without a sound. She had served the Bellicostas long enough to know when China was safer than people. Sylvie set the portfolio tube against the wall with painful care. Ramon, he said. Owen Sharp locked Clara in. Her eyes closed for 1 second. I was going to tell you. When? When I had enough that you wouldn't go put a bullet in the wrong man and bury the truth with him. The honesty of it hit harder than denial would have. Ramon laughed once. It had no humor in it. The wrong man. I needed you to hear how carefully I'm saying this. Her voice lowered. I don't know everything yet. You knew enough to record my brother in secret. Not in secret. He stepped closer. On a hidden folder in your phone. Hidden from the people who search my bags in your house when your mother gets bored. That checked him. Not because he didn't believe it. Because he did. Sylvie lifted her chin. I didn't hide it from you. I hid it from the people who have spent 19 years making sure Luca stays too medicated to be useful. He felt that under his ribs. You're accusing my family. I'm accusing someone in your family of turning a traumatized witness into furniture. Her voice stayed level. Ramon hated that levelness. It made rage feel childish. Start at the beginning, he said. Sylvie did not move. Not here. He glanced toward the breakfast room, toward the servants' staircase, toward the cameras he himself had installed years ago because paranoia aged well in his line of work. Library. She gave the smallest nod. They crossed the house in silence. Ramon's library had always smelled like cedar, leather, and the faint medicinal trace of old paper. This morning it smelled like exposure. Sylvie stood by the empty fireplace, hands loose at her sides, while Ramon shut the doors. Talk, he said. She looked at the phone in his hand. First, I need you to understand something. Luca did not suddenly recover and tell me a tidy story. Memory doesn't work that way. Trauma doesn't work that way. He gives pieces. Sound. Color. Repetition. What I've been doing is helping him build. Sequence. You're not a doctor. No, I restore damaged things. Line was so clean it might have sounded rehearsed in someone else. In Sylvie it landed like fact. She took a breath. 6 months ago your mother asked me to evaluate the Bellicosta archives before that museum donation in Philadelphia. Half the boxes were smoke-damaged from Pier 9, prayer books, choir folios, personal letters, insurance schedules. And mixed in with them were drawings Luca had made after the fire. No one had cataloged those. No one had even labeled them properly. They were all filed under miscellaneous juvenile material. Ramon said nothing. I noticed the same pattern repeating, she went on. Blue panes. Yellow doors. 3 vertical lines. Always in groups of 11. 11 dead. Yes. He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze. I asked Bernice, who used to take Luca into the conservatory when he was a child. She said Clara. She told me Clara used colored glass to teach him songs. Blue for soprano, green for alto, amber for tenor. She said he used color before he used words. Ramon sat down because his knees had stopped reporting honestly. Clara, 17 when she died. Smelled like rosemary soap and cigarette smoke she tried to hide with winter mints. Sang as if the room had been built to deserve it. She used to loop ribbon through Luca's fingers so he could count measures. Sylvie continued quietly. I started bringing Luca sea glass from the Hudson. Different colors. Different sizes. He responded. Not right away. Over weeks. I film the sessions because fragmented memory is easy to romanticize after the fact. I needed record, not feeling. You should have told me. I tried twice. Her mouth tightened. The first time your mother walked into the conservatory and doubled Luca's medication by dinner. The second time Owen came to the East House and told me very politely that if I wanted a long future with you, I should stop digging in rooms that smelled like old smoke. Ramong's head came up. He said that to you? Yes. Why didn't you tell me that? Because you were in the middle of taking Port Essex public? And every other conversation in this house was about shareholder confidence, federal investigators. And the guest list for a wedding I was starting to think shouldn't happen. The last part hung there between them. Romang rose slowly. Shouldn't happen because of this? Shouldn't happen because your marriage contract transfers discretionary voting control of Luca's trust shares to you the day we sign it. His expression did not change. She saw enough to know he truly hadn't known. Your mother told you it was housekeeping, didn't she? Sylvie said. Routine family governance. Ramong remembered the clause now. 20 pages of dense language his counsel had summarized into 3 words, protective consolidation. He had signed nothing yet. The documents were scheduled for final review that afternoon. He had barely glanced at the trust annexer. Luca's shares were held in a structure Roman had never bothered to challenge. Because the Bella Costa universe ran on old habits and sealed rooms and the assumption that someone else had once read the fine print. What does that have to do with Pier 9? He asked. I don't know yet, Sylvie said. But someone has gone to unusual lengths to keep Luca incompetent on paper and silent in practice. If his memories point to negligence inside the family instead of an attack from your rivals, then the fire was not the founding wound you've been told it was. It was a cover-up. And if it was a cover-up, I bet my life there are financial structures attached to it. Ramong looked at the video still waiting in the phone. 44 unread confessions from a man everyone in his world had dismissed as broken. Did you come into my life for this? He asked. For the first time, Sylvie flinched. It was small. Honest. Impossible to miss. Ramong felt blood drain from his face. Answer me. She looked past him. Into the shelves, as if some older version of herself might be filed there in leather and dust. I took the archive contract because I needed work. That's not what I asked. No. He walked to the window, then back. So what was the first thing? The contract? Or me? The contract. And after that? After that, you spent 40 minutes helping Bernice carry boxes into the basement because the movers had gone home and you thought nobody saw. After that, you stood in the conservatory doorway while Luca threw a chess piece at your head, and you laughed instead of scaring him. After that, I stopped trusting my reasons. Ramong stared at her. It would have been easier if she had lied. He said, Tell me everything you've got. All of it. So she did. By the time she finished, the morning had hardened into gray. She showed him clipped maintenance invoices from Pier 9 with altered dates. A list of sedatives prescribed to Luca by 3 different physicians under one guardian authorization. Photos of smoke-damaged choir folios with the same 3 yellow bars drawn in the margins. A notarized memo she had found misfiled in the museum donation boxes, referring to deferred memorial obligations and the light commission, language that meant nothing to Ramong and everything to her because conservators learned to recognize the shadow vocabulary of money. The most startling thing, though, was not the paperwork. It was the pattern. Every fragment bent toward the same idea, something connected to Clara. Luca and Light had been hidden after the fire, and Owen Sharp knew enough to be afraid of anyone getting near it. When Sylvie finished, Ramong said, Who else knows? No one who can hurt you with it yet. Yet, she met his eyes. I made copies. He should have exploded. Instead, he nodded once slowly, as if the room were underwater and movement required instruction. At noon, he said. I'm supposed to sit with my mother, Owen. And the trustee to finalize the wedding transfer documents? Sylvie's face lost some color. Romang slipped her phone onto the desk between them. At noon, he said. I'm going to postpone my wedding. The noon meeting was held in the blue drawing room. Because Vivian Bellacosta liked serious conversations to happen under portraits of dead people who had survived worse. Romang arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Vivian sat straight-backed on the sofa in a dove-gray suit, pearls at her throat, hands folded over one knee. She was 68 and magnificent in the way glaciers were. Magnificent, beautiful because warmth had never improved them. Owen Sharp occupied the wing chair nearest the fireplace, broad through the chest, silver-haired, face lined into approachable authority. Men trusted Owen because he spoke like a banker and blinked like a priest. Across from them, Trustee Ansel Reed shuffled papers from a leather portfolio. Careful, neutral, old enough to remember when Bellacosta money still smelled like fish and diesel. Romang, Vivian said without smiling. You're late. I know. Owen leaned back. Big week. We forgive you. Romang took his seat and did not look at the documents placed before him. Ansel adjusted his glasses. We're here to finalize discretionary trust governance, attached to the nuptial settlement and post-marital share coordination. Standard signatures. The wedding is postponed, Romang said. Nothing moved. Then Ansel blinked. Owen's mouth stayed open just a fraction too long. Vivian did not react at all for 2 full seconds, which was how Romang knew she was furious. For how long? She asked. Indefinitely. Owen gave a soft chuckle. I assume this is because of that article in the journal about the port inquiry. We can outlast a news cycle, Romang. This has nothing to do with the journal. Then what does it have to do with? Romang finally looked at him. Owen, he said very calmly. Where were you 20 minutes before the Pier 9 fire started? Ansel froze with one sheet half raised. Vivian's fingers tightened once on her knee. Owen's expression did not crack. But Romang saw something behind the eyes. Calculation, not surprise. That's an ugly question. Owen said, I'm in an ugly mood. Owen set down his cup. I was where I said I was. In Newark, reviewing manifests. We went over this 19 years ago. With police you owned. Vivian spoke then, low and sharp. Enough. Romang turned to her. Did Luca speak to police after the fire? No. Because he couldn't, she said. Or because you made sure he didn't. Ansel slowly closed the portfolio. I think perhaps. I'm not finished, Romang said. Owen stood. If this is about Sylvie Mercer filling your head with museum nonsense, then you're letting a clever woman cost you stability. There it was. A mistake built from contempt. Romang felt the room narrow. You know her name faster than I said it. Owen smiled. We've all met your fiancée. No, Romang said. You know what she's been doing. Vivian rose now too. Romang. He ignored her. Did you threaten her? I advised her. About Old Smoke. For the first time, Owen's jaw hardened. You're upset. I understand. But if you let a conservator confuse your brother's disability with evidence. Romang was on his feet so fast Ansel gasped. He didn't strike Owen. He wanted to. He could almost feel the shape of the blow. Instead, he put both hands on the table and leaned in until they were eye level. My brother is not your disability exhibit, Romang said. And if you ever speak about him like that again, stability is going to become a very academic concept. Romang, Vivian said, now with steel. Sit down. He turned to her. Did you know about the clause transferring Luca's voting control to me after the wedding? Yes. Did I? Her silence answered it. Romang looked at Ansel. Did you explain that clause to me? Ansel swallowed. Your counsel received full documentation, not what I asked. I did not explain it personally. Did anyone explain why it was necessary? Vivian stepped between them, not physically close enough to touch anyone, but enough to claim the space. Because your brother cannot manage his own financial interests. Because you are his family. Because in this world hesitation is weakness and fragmentation is death. Ramon heard the old catechism and realized with a sick clarity how often he had mistaken it for wisdom. No more documents. He said. Nothing gets signed. Nothing gets moved. Not one share. Owen laughed again, but it was brittle now. You don't freeze a public structure because your fiancé found a scrapbook. I freeze whatever I own. You don't own all of it. Owen said. It was the wrong sentence in the wrong room. Ansel looked down. Vivian's face went white at the edges. Ramon understood then that the wedding transfer was not housekeeping. It was urgency. He smiled without warmth. Thank you. Owen recovered too late. Ramon, get out of my house. Vivian said. You do not speak to him that way. Ramon faced her fully. Then tell me why the two of you needed my marriage to happen on schedule. The question struck harder than shouting. Vivian's eyes flashed, not guilt. Not yet, but something more intimate. Fear. She picked up her gloves from the table. You are your father's son in the worst possible sense. When you don't understand something, you mistake spectacle for strength. And when you do understand something. She looked at him for a very long time. You learn how expensive truth is. Then she walked out. Owen stayed a moment longer. Ramon thought he might try charm or warning. Or a last fatherly plea. Instead, Owen buttoned his jacket and said, almost sadly, He pull at old beams. Don't act surprised when the whole house comes down on your own head. Then he followed Vivian out. Ansel Reed lingered with his papers trembling in his hands. Ramon said, How much do you know? Ansel looked every one of his 72 years. Enough to tell you that if this family has kept a secret around Pier 9, it's tied to something your father called the Harbor Light obligations. I never saw the underlying instrument. Only references. And I was instructed never to raise the subject again. By whom? The old man's eyes flicked toward the closed door. Ramon nodded. That afternoon he went to see Luca. The East House sat behind the main residence, all glass and limestone. Originally built as a conservatory wing and later converted into the quiet annex where difficult family truths were placed behind tasteful landscaping. Ramon had not noticed how prison-like it was until he walked in with questions instead of habit. Luca sat by the long window in the solarium, wearing a navy cardigan despite the heat. A tray with untouched lunch rested on the side table. On the rug in front of him lay a scatter of sea glass in careful rows. Blue, green, amber, blue. Nurse Delia stood when Ramon entered. Mr. Bellacosta. He's had his noon meds. What meds? She hesitated. Ramon looked at the chart. Clipped near the door. Lorazepam, quetiapine. Two others he didn't recognize. What happened to the old regimen? He asked. Delia adjusted her glasses. This is what Dr. Sills prescribed last quarter. Why? He was having agitation episodes. Ramon looked at Luca, who rocked once, lightly, not agitated at all. When were these doses increased? Delia's discomfort deepened. You'd have to ask Mrs. Bellacosta. Of course. Ramon dismissed her and waited until the door clicked shut. Luca did not look up at first. Ramon lowered himself onto the floor several feet away. Suit pants be damned. And let the silence settle the way Sylvie did in the videos. After a minute, he said, Hey. Luca touched one cobalt shard to one amber shard. Then separated them. Ramon had spent years loving his brother with gifts, facilities, protection, and an absence of demands. It had felt merciful. Now it looked an awful lot like surrender. He said, I saw your videos. Luca's fingers stilled. Ramon kept his voice even. Sylvie showed me. A lie, but a gentle one. Luca glanced up then. His eyes were brown like Clara's. Only older with confusion and medication. Blue means choir, Ramon said. Luca blinked. Yellow means door. A tremor passed through the younger man's mouth. Ramon leaned in, slow, careful, sharp. Luca shut his eyes so hard his whole face pulled inward. Ramon nearly cursed himself. But then Luca reached for the blue glass and put 3 pieces in Ramon's palm. Blue. Blue. Amber. He pressed Ramon's fist close around them. Then In the smallest voice Ramon had ever heard from him, he said. Light. That was all. It was more than Ramon had received from him in years. When Ramon left the East House, he called Sylvie for the first time that day. She answered on the second ring. Where are you? He asked. At the Archive apartment on Green Street. I'm coming. The Archive apartment had once belonged to a retired judge who collected Venetian mirrors and bad men's secrets. Ramon had bought it through 3 shell companies to store Bellacosta records pending appraisal. The irony was not lost on him now. Sylvie had taken over the dining room with banker's boxes, light tables, cotton gloves, and stacks of folders held down by old brass weights. Her coat hung over the back of a chair. She had changed into a black sweater and pinned her hair up with a pencil. Ramon noticed stupid things when he was trying not to notice whether he could still trust someone. She had set out copies for him. Medical records here, she said. Pier 9 maintenance here. Those drawings there. And this, she slid over a thin sheaf of papers. Ramon read the title. Bellacosta Family Holding Trust Supplemental Guidance. 2008. His father had been alive then. Though already failing after the stroke. Ramon skimmed until a phrase snagged him. In the event of unresolved harbor light exposures. Discretionary control of Class C memorial shares shall remain separate from principal operating interests until restoration. Obligations are satisfied or extinguished. He read it twice. Memorial shares, he said. Sylvie nodded. That language appears nowhere else in the trust. I've searched every annexer. What does it mean? I think Luca owns a block of shares connected to Pier 9, not as inheritance. As obligation. Ramon looked up. She stepped closer to the table and laid down another document, an internal memo from Owen Sharp to outside counsel. Dated 11 days after the fire. Pending criminal clarity. Memorial instruments should remain dormant. Public activation would be interpreted as admission. Ramon's eyes narrowed. Activation of what? I don't know yet. He read the memo again. Owen's signature sat neat and decisive at the bottom, like a man approving office drapes. Why wouldn't you bring this straight to me? Sylvie gave him a hard, tired look. Because I had watched you for 2 years do exactly what your mother and Owen expected. Protect the structure first. Ask what it was built over second. Ramon absorbed that without defense because it was true enough to sting. She walked to the sideboard and brought back a child's drawing in a clear sleeve. It showed 11 crooked rectangles under a high arch of blue and yellow. Luca drew this 3 days after the fire, she said. The back says, in Clara's handwriting, windows for everybody. I think Clara was planning some kind of memorial installation with him before she died. Your father may have turned it into something else after the fire. Ramon studied the blue and yellow panes. Father hid it in light, he murmured. Sylvie met his eyes. Yes. How? I found invoices from a glassworks in Red Hook your father quietly retained for 6 months after. Pier 9. Bellacosta Glass. It shut down 20 years ago. The payment trail after the fire is strange large orders billed as Memorial Commission materials. Then a stop order from Owen. No delivery confirmation. No asset transfer. It's like the job vanished. Ramon's heartbeat slowed into that dangerous clarity he recognized from high-stakes negotiations and gunfire. You think whatever this harbor light thing is? It's in the glassworks. I think Luca remembers windows because the truth was tied to them. Ramon looked around the room. At the records of his life breaking into separate pieces. Get your coat, he said. Where are we going? Red Hook. The old glassworks stood at the end of a dead street by the water, its brick walls veined with salt and time. The sign had long ago lost most of its letters. By el usta glss remained, ghosting what the place used to be. Ramon had not been there since he was 23. And still believed ruined family properties could wait forever. He killed the engine and looked at the building in the dusk. I forgot this existed, he said. Sylvie beside him was studying the boarded upper windows. That's what people count on. Ramon got out first. The side gate chain was new. Not 19 years old, abandoned, new enough to have been checked in the last year. Ramon touched the lock. then stepped back. Owen, he said. Sylvie looked over. You're sure? Nobody else in my family remembers maintenance. He cut the chain with bolt cutters from the trunk. It was not the first time he had equipped a car for two wildly different kinds of evening. Inside, the air smelled of rust, kill dust, and old river damp. Moonlight leaked through cracked panes high above. Their flashlights moved over work tables, rolls of lead came, wooden crates, and tall racks covered in stained canvas shrouds. Sylvie's breath changed. Rama. He turned. She was standing before the nearest rack with one hand lifted, not touching, just hovering in disbelief. Ramon helped peel back the canvas. A stained glass panel emerged under dust. It was unfinished but unmistakably beautiful. A harbor at dawn rendered in deep cobalt and silver, with 11 thin gold lights burning along the pier. Not saints. Not angels. Windows. Sylvie whispered, "Oh my God." Behind it was another panel. And another. 12 in all, stacked like silenced music. Ramon stepped closer to the first one. Along the bottom edge in tiny painted script were names: Clara Bellacosta, Thomas Calderon, May Whitlock, Jonas Reed, Eli Nader, and 7 more. The dead. These were memorial windows, Sylvie said. He commissioned them. My father? Yes. Ramon ran a thumb over the lead seam. For what? She crouched near the wooden base. Help me lift this. Together they eased the first panel aside. Behind the rack stood a narrow cabinet fitted into the wall. Its brass keyhole was wrapped in brittle florist ribbon, blue faded almost to gray. Ramon stared at it. Clara used to put ribbon on anything she wanted Luca to remember, he said quietly. Sylvie turned to him. You never told me that. There's a lot I never told you. She held his gaze for a beat, then looked back at the cabinet. The key was not in the hole. Ramon checked the shelves, the floor, the cabinet top, cursing under his breath. Sylvie moved to the second panel and shone her light along the lead frame. Wait. She pointed. One vertical seam near the lower corner was wider than the others, capped with a tiny soldered rosette shaped like a flower. Not decorative. Intentional. Ramon fetched a screwdriver from the old tool bench and pried carefully. The seam opened with a metallic sigh. Inside was a hollow channel. He looked at Sylvie. She nodded once. He tipped the panel. A rolled oilskin packet slid into his hand. Neither of them spoke. Ramon opened it on the work table. Inside were 3 sealed envelopes, a set of old share certificates, and a letter in his father's handwriting. Matteo Bellacosta wrote like a man who distrusted both ink and time. Ramon, if this reaches you, then either I found my courage too late, or someone helped bury it before I could spend it. What happened at Pier 9 was not war. It was negligence, vanity, and fear. Clara died because doors meant for safety were chained for inventory control. 11 families buried their dead while we buried the truth. I let this house keep breathing by lying to the city, and every dollar earned afterward carried smoke in it. The enclosed memorial shares belong morally and materially to the families named in the restoration schedule. Luca remembers where I hid this because Clara helped choose the glass. If he ever speaks, listen the first time. Do not let Owen extinguish the light. A father who failed you. Matteo. Roman finished the letter and stood perfectly still. Sylvie slowly opened the second envelope. Inside lay a document titled Restoration Schedule Harbor Light Trust. It listed the 11 dead and their surviving spouses, children, or parents. Beside each name was a percentage allocation of a 32% share block in Bellacosta Port Holdings. Enough to change control of the entire empire. The third envelope contained a stop order, signed by Owen Sharp, canceling installation of the memorial windows and redirecting assets pending litigation risk. Ramon read it, then read it again. The villainy of it was almost boring in its neatness. Not a gangster's flourish, a manager's choice. He heard Sylvie say his name and realized he had gripped the table so hard his knuckles had gone white. He knew, Ramon said. Sylvie's voice was very careful. Yes, my father knew. Yes. My mother knew. Sylvie did not answer. He laughed once, brokenly. Of course she knew. Outside, the river slapped against the bulkhead in slow black beats. Ramon picked up the letter again. A father who failed you. He had hated Matteo for dying without ever apologizing for the shape of the world he left behind. Now the apology sat in his hand, hidden inside a window for 19 years because the man had found remorse only after choosing. Cowardice. Ramon should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt tired in a place deeper than anger. Sylvie touched the edge of the work table. We need to move these. No. She looked at him. If we move anything tonight, Owen will know by morning, Ramon said. We photograph everything. We copy everything. Then we put it back. She studied him for a second, measuring whether rage had made him reckless. I need more than fury from you, she said softly. Ramon met her eyes. You'll get it. They worked for 2 hours. Photographs, scans with her portable rig, notes on every panel, every seam. Ramon removed 3 more holocams and found additional papers, payment receipts to the widows never sent, a draft public statement never issued, and a list of municipal officials Owen had paid through shell vendors in the months after the fire. Not all of it was criminal on its face. Enough of it was. At some point, Sylvie climbed a step stool to photograph a panel and swayed slightly from fatigue. Ramon put a hand at her waist without thinking. She went still. So, did he? For a moment the old building held only dust motes, river sound, and the awareness that trust had become more intimate than touch. She stepped down slowly. Thank you. He let go. Don't, he said. Don't what? Be careful with me out of guilt. Sylvie's mouth tightened. And you don't be kind with me out of grief. That almost made him smile. They kept working. Near midnight, they sat on overturned crates while her scanner uploaded copies to 3 encrypted drives. Ramon loosened his tie and stared at the memorial windows standing, half uncovered in the moonlight. Clara would have loved these, he said. Sylvie followed his gaze. Tell me about her. He did. Not the public Clara, the real one. How she stole olives from restaurant trays and complained that expensive hotels smelled dead. How she wanted to study voice, not business. How she brought stray musicians into the kitchen and let Luca sit under the piano while she practiced scales. How, when Ramon came home bloodied at 19 from a fight he called business, Clara had looked at him and said, You keep mistaking being feared for being impossible to lose. Sylvie listened the way restorers handled fractured varnish patiently, without hurrying damage to call itself healed. When he stopped, she said, You still think if you loosen your grip, everyone dies. Ramon looked at her. Sometimes they do. Her face softened. And sometimes they've already been dying under it. He did smile then, barely. Tired and unwilling. Did you rehearse that? No, I just know you. The words settled between them with more force than either of them seemed prepared for. Ramon stood too quickly. We should go. In the car back to Manhattan, the silence was full, not empty. Ramon drove with one hand on the wheel. The city lights smeared gold on wet pavement. Halfway over the bridge he said, When did you know you loved me? Sylvie turned from the window slowly. That's a cruel question tonight. I asked anyway. She was quiet for a long time. Not when you bought me an emerald bracelet I never wore, she said. Not when the magazines decided I was your redemption story. Not even when you proposed. Ramon exhaled through his nose. Good to know. It was the day Luca had a seizure in the conservatory last winter. Your mother called 3 doctors before she called his name. You came in from a board call, picked him up off the tile, and talked to him like the world wasn't ending just because yours hates losing control. You said, I'm here, Bug. I'm here. Over and over. And I thought, there you are. The part of you no one gets because everyone's too busy negotiating with the armor. He kept his eyes on the road. And you? She asked quietly. When did you know? Ramon took the exit without answering. She didn't press at 2 in the morning. When he dropped her outside her building, he finally said, When you told me my mother's portrait had been cleaned too often by frightened people. Sylvie blinked. He looked at her then. You said it was why the eyes had gone flat. A small stunned laugh left her. Ramon gripped the wheel. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be ugly. She opened the door, then paused. Ramo. He waited. If you go after Owen like the old version of yourself, everything your father hid becomes leverage. Not justice. He nodded once. I know. He meant it when he said it. He did not know if that would save anyone. The next morning Vivian summoned him. Which was how she thought of all family meetings. Ramon went to her private sitting room without asking permission. Because rebellion had finally become less exhausting than obedience. She was alone. No pearls today. No armor except posture. On the table between them lay a photograph of Clara at 15, grinning with cake icing on her cheek while Luca, 7 then, clung to her shoulder. Vivian had been looking at it. Ramon could tell because she never voluntarily left the past uncovered. I suppose you found something, she said. Ramon closed the door. Did you come to the glassworks after the fire? Vivian looked at the photograph instead of him. Yes. Did father show you the memorial windows? Yes. Did you know about the trust? Her gaze lifted. I knew enough. He waited. Finally, she said, your father was not a brave man in the ways that count most. He could face guns. He could face prosecutors. He could not face the mothers of dead children if it meant admitting our empire was built not on strength but on carelessness. Ramon felt anger rise again. So you helped him hide it. Her expression sharpened. I helped keep this family alive. By lying. By choosing between two ruins. She stood. Do you know what would have happened if we had admitted internal negligence then? The city would have bled us dry. The lenders would have called loans. The unions would have torn us open. The city would have fed on us for a decade. And every man waiting to take your father's territory would have come with a knife in his teeth. You were 24. Luca would have been dragged through hearings and doctors and newspapers until there was nothing left of him but evidence. Ramon stared at her. So you sacrificed 11 dead families to save our reputation? Vivian's voice dropped. Do not reduce it for your own comfort. I sacrificed the truth to keep 3 living children from being devoured by the same world that had already eaten one. Clara was one of those children. The line landed. Vivian flinched. Ramon had seen his mother angry, cold, strategic, bored, triumphant. He had almost never seen her wounded. That night, she said, each word placed carefully, I went to Pier 9 because Clara refused to come home. She was fighting with your father about the chapel commission. She wanted the old loading room opened for the choir benefit. Matteo wanted it closed because some of the inventory in the adjoining bay had not been properly declared. Ramon felt the room go colder. Undeclared how? Vivian's jaw set. Fuel solvents. Lacquer thinner. A shipment routed off book to avoid tariff exposure. Owen told your father it was temporary. Harmless. Standard. Standard, Ramon repeated. I said no. Vivian snapped suddenly, anger cracking through control. I said no to using that wing with children in the building. I said no to chaining the yellow door because the city inspector might wander through and ask the wrong questions. I said no to every cheap compromise men make when they think money will outrun consequence. Her eyes shone now, not with softness, but with rage turned inward over 19 years. Owen told me he would clear the bay himself before the guests arrived. He did not. Clara saw the chain on the door. She cut it once. He had it fastened again. Ramon swallowed. Luca's broken memory aligned inside him like metal clicking into a lock. She fought him? He asked. Yes. And you? I left, Vivian said. The word was almost inaudible. Ramon stared. I thought Matteo would handle it, she said. I thought if I stayed another minute, I would say something in front of workers and musicians and donors that would burn the whole structure down before I knew whether the danger was real. By the time the fire started, I was crossing Delancey. Owen called and said there'd been an accident. Ramon felt physically ill. You left Clara there, he said. Vivian closed her eyes. Yes. No defense. No polishing. Just yes. For one wild second he wanted to smash every piece of glass in the room. Instead he asked, "Why medicate Luca?" Her eyes opened. "I did not tell them to drown him. I signed a stabilization order after the fire when he stopped sleeping and tore his hands bloody against the walls. After that," she looked away. "After that Owen handled most of the medical recommendations. Your father trusted him. Then your father got sick. Then one doctor became 3. Then sedated became manageable, and manageable became routine, and routine became the shape of the house." Ramon heard the horror in it. Not one grand murder, but 19 years of small permissions. "Where is Owen now?" he asked. Vivian's gaze sharpened on him. "If you found what I think you found, he will not wait for you to become noble. He will move first." Ramon's phone rang. Sylvie. He answered immediately. "Ramon," she said, breathless. Someone was in the apartment. His whole body locked. "Are you hurt?" "No, I left for coffee. The lock was jimmied when I got back. 2 boxes torn open. My laptop gone. Were the scans on it?" "Locally. Yes. But the drives are safe. I split them. Where are you?" "Downstairs with the doorman. I'm coming," Vivian said. "He'll go for Luca too." Ramon turned at the door. His mother stood very straight. Both hands braced on the back of a chair as if the bones inside her were suddenly less reliable than the furniture. "In the top drawer of Matteo's desk," she said, "there is a brass key wrapped in blue ribbon. I always wondered why he kept it after the windows vanished." Ramon held her gaze for a long moment. Then he left without another word. By the time he reached Green Street, Sylvie had already begun making order out of violation. The apartment looked as though anger had worn gloves and searched with purpose. File boxes overturned. 2 drawers dumped. Nothing random. Nothing theatrical. "They wanted paper," Sylvie said. Ramon checked the bedroom, the kitchen, the service hall. "Anything else missing?" "Only the laptop and 1 camera card. Not the scanner. Not the jewelry tray. Not the cash envelope. So not thieves." She crossed her arms against the cold from the open window lock. "No." He told her about Vivian. Sylvie listened without interrupting, though once when he repeated, "I left," her face changed in that tight, sympathetic way he had already started to fear, because it made him want comfort from the one person he could least afford to need. When he finished, she said, "If Owen searched here, he doesn't know about the hidden channels in the panels. No. He may still think the only leverage is Luca." Ramon was already dialing the East House. No answer. He dialed again. Then Delia picked up, voice shaking. "Mr. Bellacosta, where is my brother? There was an emergency transfer order. Dr. Sills. They said he was having a severe episode and needed observation at St. Gabriel's private wing." Ramon's vision sharpened to a dangerous point. "Who signed?" A pause. "Mr. Sharp authorized the transport." Ramon ended the call and was already moving when Sylvie caught his sleeve. "Hospital?" she asked. "Private clinic wing." She grabbed her coat. "I'm coming." St. Gabriel sat on the Upper East Side, behind a limestone facade designed to make money feel clean. Ramon knew 2 board members and owned the debt on a neighboring property. He had given to their pediatric wing twice. For reasons that now felt grotesque. They took the private entrance because the public one would have cost time. A night administrator met them with practiced politeness that evaporated when Ramon said, "If my brother has been chemically restrained without my consent, this building is about to have a very expensive decade." The administrator went pale and called upstairs. They found Luca in a quiet room on the neurology floor, not restrained, but deeply sedated. And 4 in his arm, eyes half open and unseeing. Ramon stopped in the doorway. Sylvie made a sound he had never heard from her. Small and furious. Dr. Sills arrived 3 minutes later in a white coat and administrative smile. He began with, "Mr. Bellacosta, I understand this is distressing." Ramon closed the distance between them. "You understand almost nothing," he said. Sills tried to recover. Your brother presented with escalating agitation and self-harm risk. According to whom? His guardian representative, which is not Owen Sharp. Sills's gaze flickered. That was enough. Ramong said. Pull the chart. The doctor hesitated. Ramong turned to the administrator. Now. The chart told the story. A transfer order signed electronically through the Bellacosta family office. Medication escalated on arrival. Consent witness. Owen Sharp. Ramong looked up from the pages. Discharge him, Sills said. He is medically vulnerable. Ramong handed the chart to Sylvie, then took one step closer to the doctor. Listen carefully. If my brother stays in this room 1 hour longer, every signature on that file gets reviewed by a federal prosecutor, your board, and the New York press. If he leaves with me, you might retain the fiction that this was administrative confusion. Choose the version that lets you keep your license. Luca was in the car 25 minutes later. Wrapped in a blanket, head against the seat. Sylvie in the back beside him. Ramong drove downtown with both hands welded to the wheel. At a red light, Sylvie said quietly. He'll expect retaliation. He's getting exposure instead. Good. Ramong looked in the mirror. That easy? No. She brushed Luca's hair back from his forehead. That necessary. At the house, Bernice met them at the side entrance with the kind of competence that appears only in people who have already survived worse. She had turned down Luca's room, prepared tea no one would drink, and set out cold towels for his wrists. Your mother sent this, she said, pressing a small envelope into Ramong's hand. Inside was the brass key wrapped in faded blue ribbon. No note. Ramong closed his fist around it. Bernice glanced toward the stairs where Luca was being taken. Miss Clara used to keep ribbons on the pantry hooks, she said softly. Said colors made frightened things easier to follow. Ramong nodded because if he tried to speak, something unmanageable might happen to his face. That night, while Luca slept under the watch of a physician Ramong actually trusted, Ramong and Sylvie opened Mateo's desk. The brass key fit not a drawer, but the false back of the lowest cabinet. Behind it lay a ledger wrapped in oilcloth and tucked beneath it, a small reel-to-reel tape in a labeled box. Clara Harbor Lighta notes as Sylvie stared. Can you play that? Ramong almost smiled despite everything. In this house? There's a machine for every dead century. The tape recorder was in the music room, of course, because Mateo Bellacosta had believed sentiment deserved expensive machinery. Roman threaded the reel with hands steadier than he felt. At first there was only hiss. Then, Clara's voice. Young, bright, alive enough to tear the air open. Testing. Testing. If Papa records over this for opera again, I'll haunt him. Ramong shut his eyes once. Then Clara laughed on the tape, and the room changed around the sound of someone impossible. This is for Luca. Harbor Light notes. Blue for the names. Yellow for the doors. Red means stop. If you forget, follow the song. A piano chord. Then her voice counting colors and window positions in a pattern that at first sounded like a child's exercise. Blue 3, amber 1, green 2, yellow side, red under bell. Sylvie sat up straighter. That's not a song. No. It's a map. Clara continued, more serious now. If Mr. Sharp says it's none of our business, it is. If Mama says leave it, don't. If Ramong hears this, tell him he looks ridiculous when he pretends not to care. Despite himself, Ramong made a shattered sound that might once have been laughter. The tape clicked, hissed, then resumed. Papa says the memorial can't be public yet because lawyers eat grief and spit invoices. But the light belongs to the families, not the company. If anything happens, the schedule is under the bell. Luca remembers bells. Then the reel went. Silent. Sylvie turned slowly toward Ramon. Under the bell. The bell from Pier 9. He said. There had been an old brass stock bell salvaged after the fire and mounted in the harbor museum's atrium as part of the Bellacosta Maritime collection. Ramong had walked past it a dozen times at galas. The museum benefit, Sylvie said. He looked at her. What? Tomorrow night. The Harbor Museum Restoration Gala. Your mother's committee. Owen's keynote on legacy and civic stewardship. Of course. Romang understood at once. The old bastard had always preferred to stand nearest the things he had buried. The bell, Sylvie said again. If Clara hid the restoration schedule under it before your father moved the rest. Or if Matteo later hid a duplicate there. Ramon finished. Ramon called Ansel Reed at 1:13. The old trustee answered on the fourth ring. Sounding like he had not truly slept in years. I need to know whether the Harbor Museum bell has ever been removed from its plinth. A pause. Then, once, during the East Atrium renovation in 2017, Owen supervised the reinstall personally. Did you see any documents then? No, but I saw him refuse curatorial assistance. Raman. Ansel's voice lowered. If you are doing what I think you are doing, do it in public. Men like Owen survive private accusations. Ramon looked across the music room at Sylvie. Public. By morning. The plan had become both simple and terrifying. They would not chase Owen through lawyers' corridors and clinics and back rooms. They would force the truth into the one place he could not fully control. The story people told. When all the right witnesses were present, the Harbor Museum Gala drew board members, city officials, donors, port executives, journalists, and half the families who had lost someone at Pier 9, invited. Every year to sit through a sentimental minute of silence while Bella Costa philanthropy laundered history into culture. This year Ramon made calls of his own. To the surviving families listed in the restoration schedule. Not all of them trusted the Bella Costa name enough to answer. Enough did. To a federal attorney who had spent 3 years circling Port Essex procurement fraud. To 2 reporters Ramon had never bribed. Which was how he knew they still had a use. To a glazier's crew from Red Hook working under Sylvie's supervision all day in an undisclosed warehouse, cleaning one memorial panel just enough to let light pass. At 6:30 that evening, Ramon dressed in black tie and felt like a man preparing simultaneously for a funeral and an execution. Sylvie appeared in the doorway of his dressing room wearing a midnight blue gown so severe and clean it made every magazine fantasy about glamour look adolescent. Her hair was pinned low. No jewelry except small gold studs and the engagement ring he had given her months ago. He looked at it. She followed his gaze, then took the ring off. Ramon's expression changed before he could stop it. Sylvie came closer and set the ring on the dresser between them. Not because I don't love you, she said. His eyes lifted. Because I won't let this night be mistaken for loyalty purchased in advance. He stared at her for a long second, then nodded once. It cost him. That's fair, he said. No, she said softly. It's honest. He almost touched her. Almost. Instead he offered his arm. She took it. The Harbor Museum glowed over the river like a respectable lie. Inside, chandeliers burned above donor tables and maritime paintings. Servers passed champagne. A string quartet rearranged grief into background elegance. At the far end of the atrium stood the brass dock bell on its limestone plinth. Ropes braided around polished stanchions, and beside it, greeting trustees with avuncular ease, stood Owen Sharp. His gaze found Roman. Almost immediately. Then Sylvie. Then the absence of the engagement ring on her hand. Something flickered there. Calculation under strain. Vivian arrived 5 minutes later in black silk. She looked not at Owen, but at Ramon. A silent question. Are you certain? He gave no answer. The keynote program began at 8. The museum director welcomed donors. A city councilman praised heritage. A widow from one of the Pier 9 families lit a memorial candle as she had done for years without ever being told she owned a piece of the company speaking over her. Then, Owen took the stage. Legacy, he began. Smooth as old wood, is not what we inherit, but what we steward. Ramang rose from his seat before the second paragraph. Every head in the atrium turned. Owen stopped speaking. Ramang did not hurry. He walked to the stage as if he owned not just the room, but the story it had borrowed, which after tonight he intended to Forgive the interruption, he said into the microphone once he reached the podium. Mr. Sharp is right about one thing. Legacy stewardship. Which is why lies passed down as tradition eventually become theft. A rustle moved through the room. Owen stepped toward him. Ramon, this is neither the time nor the place. It is exactly the place. That's why you chose it. Security shifted at the edges. Ramon saw 2 reporters already recording. He continued, voice level. 19 years ago, 11 people died in the fire at Pier 9. We were told it was sabotaged by rivals. We were told the company survived an attack. We were told grief had no address except fate. Tonight I am correcting the record. He nodded toward the atrium doors. They opened. 4 glaziers rolled in a steel frame carrying the cleaned memorial panel, lit from behind. A harbor at dawn. 11 gold lights. The room went dead silent. People stood without realizing they had done it. Sylvie walked beside the panel, one hand steadying the frame like a priestess escorting evidence. On the front row, one of the widows, May Whitlock's sister. Gray-haired, now put her hand over her mouth and began to cry. Ramon let the image do what words could not for a beat. Then lifted a folder. My father commissioned 12 memorial windows after the fire and created a trust, assigning 32% of Bella Costa Port holdings to the families of the dead. The trust was never activated. The windows were hidden. The records were suppressed. And my brother, the only surviving witness inside the loading room, was medicated into silence while the man who helped engineer the concealment accepted awards for civic stewardship. Owen's face had gone bloodless. That is a lie, he said. Stepping to the microphone. Ramon handed the folder not to him, but to the federal attorney already moving through the aisle. It's documented, Ramon said. Cancelled installation orders. Hidden payment schedules. Bribery chains. Medical transfer authorizations signed under false authority. We can litigate the details after dessert. The room erupted. Questions, shouts, chair legs scraping stone. Owen lunged not at Ramon, but toward the bell. Sylvie saw it first. Ramon! Owen's hand hit the plinth as though he meant to steady himself. Ramon understood at once. There was still something hidden there. He intercepted him hard enough that both men struck the base of the stage. The bell boomed once overhead, a brutal metallic note that silenced the room better than any gavel. Owen shoved him back with surprising strength. You self-righteous little fool, Owen hissed. Do you think those families wanted shares more than they wanted jobs? Your father knew what collapse would do. My father knew what guilt would do, Ramon said, and drove him against the plinth. Security swarmed then, but not fast enough to prevent Vivian Bellacosta from stepping onto the stage, taking the museum director's ceremonial mallet, and striking the bell's retaining pin so sharply it cracked loose. The bell tilted. Under its base, taped in oilskin to the hollow pedestal interior, was a flat packet. Inaudible gasp moved through the atrium. Vivian looked at Owen with a face no son would ever mistake. Again. I said no, she said. Then she handed the packet to the attorney. Owen did not fight after that. Perhaps he knew the geometry had turned against him. Perhaps at last he saw that the house he had spent 2 decades preserving had chosen exposure over him. Either way, he went quiet as security and 2 plainclothes investigators took his arms. The rest happened in splinters. Reporters crowded the families. Ansel Reed, trembling but upright, confirmed the memorial share. Structure on record. The widow's sister touched the stained glass with 2 fingertips and whispered her brother's name as if sound itself had finally been paid back with interest. Luca, brought in late under Bernice's care because Sylvie had insisted truth should not be built entirely around his absence, stood at the edge of the atrium in a dark suit and watched the lit window. Ramon went to him. Luca lifted one trembling hand and pressed it against the blue glass. Then, to no one and everyone, he said, clear enough this time for the microphones to catch it. Clara's light. There were tears all through the room by then, including on faces Ramon had previously thought professionally waterproof. He looked for Sylvie. She was standing a little apart from the crush, shoulders low for the first time in days. Watching the families gather near the panel as if proximity alone could alter the dead. Ramon crossed to her. For a moment neither of them spoke, then he said, "When this started, I was angry you left your phone." A faint, exhausted smile touched her mouth. "I had noticed. If you hadn't, I might have married you before I knew how to deserve it." Her eyes searched his face. "And now? Now I know enough to postpone the question until it isn't attached to rescue, guilt, leverage, or family machinery." Sylvie breathed out, something between relief and grief. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." He laughed. Tired and real. Around them, the museum had become a crime scene. A vigil, a press conference, and the beginning of a lawsuit large enough to alter shipping routes. Ramon should have been thinking about markets, board revolts, prosecutors, retaliation. Instead he said, "Stay." She looked at him carefully. "Tonight?" Through the ugly part. Her answer took no drama. No cinematic pause. "Yes." The months that followed were not clean. Justice never was. Owen Sharp was indicted on fraud, obstruction, bribery, and conspiracy related to the fire cover-up and subsequent financial suppression. 3 doctors settled before trial and surrendered licenses. St. Gabriel's issued apologies written by people paid to sound human. Bella Costa Port Holdings lost a third of its market value in 6 weeks and then, to the astonishment of almost everyone who had built careers on cynicism, did not die. Because the families kept their shares. Because Ramon refused to buy them out. Because the union leaders, when shown the actual restoration schedule and the concealed safety violations, chose blood memory over market panic and backed a reconstruction plan that placed workers and victim families on a new oversight board. Vivian testified once, under oath, and aged 10 years in an afternoon. Afterward, she withdrew from every public role and moved into the old Hudson house alone, except for a gardener and her ghosts. Ramon saw her on Sundays sometimes. They were not healed. They were honest. It was a harder arrangement. The memorial windows were completed under Sylvie's direction and installed not in a private chapel, not in a family museum, but in a rebuilt public hall at the harbor where ferries and workers and schoolchildren passed through. Light meant for everyone. Each panel carried the names of the dead and, in tiny painted script along the final border, a dedication for those whose truth was delayed, not denied. Luca came to the installation at dawn before the crowd arrived. He stood in the new hall while the first sun pushed through cobalt, amber, and green. The colors broke over his face, his hands. The floor. Ramon stood beside him. "So," Ramon said quietly, "blue means choir." Luca looked up at the lit glass and nodded. "Yellow means door," Ramon said. Another nod. After a moment, Luca tapped the red pane once, then touched Ramon's sleeve. Ramon waited. Luca searched for the word, found it, and gave it to him. "Stop." Ramon swallowed hard. "Yes." A year later, on an evening without cameras, Ramon found Sylvie in the public hall after closing, kneeling on the floor with a rag and solvent, removing a child's handprint from the lower border of the 8th panel. "You have staff for that," he said. She glanced back. "And deprive myself of muttering at strangers in sacred places?" He sat beside her in his coat and expensive shoes. She kept working for another minute. "How was the board meeting?" "They approved the worker scholarship fund, barely. I had to threaten 3 men with retirement." "Your growth remains imperfect. Tragic." The last streak of sunset lit the hall from behind them. The windows glowed. Ramon took something from his pocket and set it on the stone between them. Not a velvet box. Just the old engagement ring, and beside it, a narrow gold band etched on the inside with one word. "Light." Sylvie stared. Ramon said, "No gala. No contract annexer. No family leverage. No transfer clauses. No audience. Just a question." When she looked at him, his face was utterly unguarded. "If you marry me now," he said, "it will be because we survived. The truth in the same direction." Sylvie's eyes filled before her smile did. That is still the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. She picked up the band. Then she put it on. Outside. Fairies sounded low across the dark water. Inside, the windows held blue, amber, green, red, names carried in light dot, and for the first time in Ramon Bellacosta's life, what he had saved was not the Empire dude, it was what the Empire had tried to bury.